Hi. All right, hi everyone. Thanks for coming today. Hope you guys had a relaxing Memorial Day weekend. Nice long weekend. So today, I'm gonna go through one more concept in Python. That would be pretty useful for any programs that you want to write. And then we'll go. Hopefully, I have planned two kind of like games or programs that we're gonna create today. So hopefully we can get to both. If not, I'll still post the code online with what we covered today. Let me share my screen. So I see a question about the Java class. So if you guys were busy yesterday doing Memorial Day, that's completely fine. The recording is on should be on the tiny URL. I'll check after class just to make sure that it's there. But it's pretty important to watch that recording from yesterday because Caitlin went through a lot of pretty important concepts for Java and object-oriented programming. So it'd be pretty good to check out that video if you're going to continue with the Java class in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, so we'll get started with Python. So I've created 3 files, but for now you just have to create your whatever file you want to work with today. So I named it class6.py. Yeah. So last week we went through a lot of different methods that we created. So like for example, what we did was like switch characters in a string. We manipulated strings. So one other thing that we did not get to last class that I just want to demonstrate for you guys, it's a pretty simple example. So if you were to have a function that you want to determine whether another string is inside a string. So for example, if you have the string called and you want to determine whether it is in another string. So for example, if that string is hello, then it would return false because and is not in hello. But if you have and then your other word that you're comparing to is like sand, then that would return true, because you can see that and is located here so it's an and, so it's like inside the string. So that's what we call a substring. So we're going to create a simple method just to determine whether we're given 2 strings to determine whether that first string is in that second string. So I'll just create it is a substring. And then we have our first string, we have our second string. And then I'll say if str1 in str2, then return true, and then return false. So I'll just print this out real quick. So if we have, I'll do our first example and hello. So that'll give us false. And then if I were to do the true example, that would give us true. So the way this works is we have an if statement here. And then like from the beginning, we've basically been saying that Python is like a pretty simple language for you to learn. And in terms of that, it's pretty similar to English. Like this is like a pretty good example of how simple Python is, because you can just see, so this is the first string that I'm given. So and that would be my like substring, the smaller string that I'm trying to compare. Then I have the second string that I'm trying to compare to. Then I can just say, what is this string in that string? So it's like basically just like English. Is this in that? So in is like a pretty nice keyword to use. It's pretty convenient. So I see a question about the else. So in any function, so since I'm in this if statement and I'm returning a true here, so once this returns true, nothing afterwards will be executed. So I can either do else return false, but it's not really required, because if I just keep it indented outside like that, then once it returns true, the function is done. So it will not worry about what's after. But then if it's not true, then it will return false. So that's exactly what we want. So in this case, the else is optional. Does everyone understand why the else is optional? That's kind of like a confusing concept, but yeah. Okay. So yeah, just remember the in keyword is pretty useful. We'll go to it later in class today. So so one thing that we've been doing is we've been creating lists, which are just a total like a list of anything, like which we are calling an array. So another thing that you can do is sort of create a dictionary, and every dictionary, so that's another type in Python. So every dictionary will have a key and a value. So every key in the dictionary corresponds to a certain value, and either of these can be of type. So my key can be of type string to an integer, or I can do integer to string. So you can do anything that you want, float to list, like an array. It can be anything that you want. So in this case, I'm just going to create a dictionary and just do a couple of, oops, that's not how you do it. So I'll say dictionary equals, and then use parentheses or curly braces like this. So in the list, we've been using these square brackets, but in a dictionary, you want to use the curly brackets. If you're in the Java class, these are like the same things that we use for if statements, functions, or anything. So these curly braces. So I'll create a dictionary that contains information about like any car. So if we have a brand, then I'll say my brand is Ford. And then I can do a model, and then we'll say that's Mustang. And then I'll say the year. And we'll say it's 1995. I don't know. So yeah, so in this dictionary, we have 3 different keys. So in this case, the keys are brand, model, and year. So these are basically different ways that you can store attributes for this certain Ford Mustang. So we have the brand is Ford, the model is Mustang, and then whatever year it was manufactured. So I can just print this out to show you guys what it looks like. Yeah, so we get a dictionary that looks like this, which looks pretty similar to what I typed in the code. So you guys notice how I did the curly braces like this? So I just do this to like make it look a little nicer. You can obviously do something like this to create your dictionary all on one line. So this is still valid also. But I just like to keep it like this so it looks a little nicer and a little bit more organized. You're saying to scroll to the top. I'm already scrolled to the top, so there's no more code there. So another thing that you can do to access these like certain elements. So if I want to see specifically what kind of model my car is, I can access that model through these brackets like this. So similarly, how in a string, so if let's do a quick example. If I have a string that is a string like that, and then I'm saying, oops, I'll do string, and then if I want to print out the first letter, I can access it with, you remember, the different indexes. So if I were to run that, it will just print out a T. So like we can access indexes through these numbers. But in a dictionary, it's not really an index or anything, but it's more of the key that you want to access it by. So if I do print dictionary model, then you see here it printed out Mustang. So basically just access whatever element is at that specific key. Another way to do it, there's no difference between these 2 ways. You can use the .get. So model, so I do dictionary .get model, it'll print it out again. So either one of these are pretty valid to get a specific attribute from this dictionary. So either the square brackets or the .get. And then another thing is you can change these dictionaries like this. So I can specifically access this year, and I want to change it from 1995 to 2020. And then if I were to print out my dictionary again, then you see the year is updated to 2020. So that's how you can manipulate values too, using the same way, similarly to how we did in lists or whatever. So that should be pretty good. Okay, so I'm getting a question about why these why 1995 doesn't need quotes. So I technically can add the quotes if I want to, but Python, oh, let me print it out. Yeah, so the quotes are still there, but since it's a year isn't really represented by a string or like words. Year is mainly represented by a number. So it's nice to represent these using the actual integer values, because Python allows me to have some attributes with string to string. So the key is a string, that value is a string. And I can also have where the key is a string and the value is an integer. I can also have like lists in here. So for example, if I have multiple Ford Mustangs, then I can do 1995, 2020, and it'll be the same thing. And then I'll just have to edit it. I can do like this, let's say it's like 2015 or something. Then you see it'll just show up as a list. So these can just be whatever type you want. It's not really restricted in Python. But yeah, that's the reason I didn't include quotations. So another thing that we is pretty common when you're using dictionaries is most likely you're going to be looping through them to grab some certain information. So this is called a dictionary and it's represented by these curly braces. But a lot of times, like in my very first internship that I had a couple of years ago, the very first project I was given was using dictionary information, and I was mainly just going through that information, going through that dictionary, which was also like JSON, if you guys know what that is. But I was basically just going through that information to grab certain information for the company, whatever they needed, and looping through dictionaries are very important. So like one way that you can loop through a dictionary is to get each key, I can say for key in dictionary. So remember, I'm just calling it key because that's what it is. This can be named whatever you want, for item, for I, for X. So I'm just gonna call it key. So for key in dictionary, I just want to print out my key. So if I just loop through a dictionary simply like this, it'll just print out each key that I have. So brand, model, and year, which is exactly what I want. So now if I want to specifically get those values, one thing I can do is I can just say print dictionary key. So that's the same way that we're doing here. We're using dictionary model, but since key is represented, as I go through the loop, is represented by each key in my entire dictionary, I can just print out those values as well, which will give me Ford, Mustang, and 2020. And obviously, if you want them together, I can just say key, and then I'll just do like space between them. So I'll just do, yeah, and we have it like that. So that's how you can get both. But if you specifically just want the values, I can just say another thing that you can use is dictionary dot values. So if I do the dot values in my for loop like that, then I'm able to just directly get every value that I want from my dictionary. Let me comment this out to make it clear. Yeah, so the same thing, we got all the values. And then the last thing, just type it out. So you see here, it would basically X and Y. So dictionary.items will basically give me two outputs. So X would represent or whatever case. So if I can say key and value. So whatever you put first will represent the key. Whatever you put second will represent the value. And then I can also print them out on the same line. Just like that. And then you can get both at the same time using .item. So these are just different ways that you can loop through a dictionary. So, so one thing we're going to do right now is we're just going to take two lists and combine them together into a single dictionary. Yeah, correct. So there's a question about dictionary.items. So yeah, the items is like a key function part of dictionaries, but dictionary is just the name of whatever dictionary I created. Okay, so I'm just going to copy and paste a couple of, two lists that I have. So these are two lists I created. So this represents students in a classroom, for example, and then their grades on a certain test. So what I want to do is basically combine those two together. So in this case, Bob would have an 85 on the test. Jill would have a 98. Joe would have a 75. Sue would have a 91. So each value sort of corresponds with the student in the other list. So I want to be able to use a for loop to create a dictionary out of these values. So I'll just create a simple function, which is called create dictionary, and it takes in two lists. So list one and list two. And then I want to create a dictionary out of these lists. So what do I need to do first? I need to create a dictionary, empty dictionary first, which I can add to. So in this case, I'll just call it my dict, and I'll create an empty dictionary like that. So that's how you can just create an empty dictionary. You just have two of these curly braces opening and closing with nothing inside. And then what I want to do is basically loop through both of these lists and sort of at the same time so that I can grab that student and then put his grade as well. So for Bob, I want it to correspond to 85. So if I were to just do for student in students, then that would only give me the student. So I can just print that out to show you guys. Students and grades. So yeah, so it's printing out all the students. So one thing that I can do is there's something in Python that you can use called zip. So I can zip both of these lists. So I put students first and grades second. So that I'm allowed, basically it allows me to go through both of these lists at the same time and to grab information at the same time. So I can do student and grade. So basically, similarly to how key and value would give me first the key and then first the value, I'm zipping both of these. So whatever I put first is the first thing that I represent here. So since it's a student, I want to have a student variable to represent each student, and then grade to represent each grade. So now what I need to do is basically add this to my dictionary. So I can do, so similarly how we create, so I manipulated values up here with the year. It's the same way that you can add attributes to a dictionary. So if I were to do my dict students is equal to grade, then that'll basically take each student in my list and assign it to whatever their corresponding grade is. And then I'll return whatever my dictionary is. So I'll say student dict is equal to this. And then I'll just print out student dict to show it. And then you see we get perfectly how we wanted it. So Bob is 85, Jill is 98, Joe is 75, and Sue is 91. So there's a lot of information there. I'll stop real quick for questions. So yeah, instead of using zip, can you use a nested loop? So we haven't gone through nested loops yet. But a nested loop is basically, if I'll just quickly show, like for I range 1 to 100 for, okay, that's actually not a good example. But basically, if you have a for loop inside of another for loop, so that would completely be valid as well. But the only thing is that once you're working with like a lot of data, then when you have nested for loops, that causes your program to do a lot of computation and it's doing a lot of stuff at the same time. So if you have a lot of data, this program could even take like a couple of minutes, which is not really what you want. So if you use something like this, it sort of slows that down, and then it won't you won't have to use a nested for loop. We try to kind of avoid nested for loops as much as possible because it kind of just slows down our program. So yeah, zip basically allows me to go through 2 arrays at the same time and then grab information. So at this time, if I were to just print out what student is and print out grade, then I'll show that. Then it shows Bob and then 85 and then Jill and then 98. So it's basically just grabbing whatever item it's at and then adding it to the dictionary.
Excuse me.
Yeah, list 1 and list 2 are just parameters that we use in our function. So I created these lists up here, and then I pass them into our function as parameters. And then since it returns a dictionary, I just created another variable to basically be equivalent to whatever I return from my function. And then I just printed that out.
Excuse me.
Okay, so someone's asking to review this code step by step. So I'll just go, I'll just review this again at the end. I'm going to try to continue on.
Excuse me, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When we are, so basically when we're doing my dict student equals grade, which is in line 49, it says that student is not defined.
So when you're doing your for loop, did you create student and grade like that? So remember, these are just temporary variables I created.
Oh, sorry. It was a syntax error. My bad, I fixed it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, so now we have student dict, which is representing every student in our class with their corresponding grades. So now what I want to do is find which student has the highest grade. We've done something similar before, so I'll just do it again, but we're using dictionaries this time. So this takes in a dictionary. So I want to find the highest grade. So let's find student with highest grade. So in this case, I want to just print out the student and whatever his grade was, or his or her grade was. So for def, you don't always have to use return. Since Python doesn't really specify whether you need to return anything, it's pretty optional. So in this case, in this method, I'm not going to return anything. I'm just going to print out. So what I'll first do is basically create a variable to represent my max grade. So I'll start it at 0 because everyone's grade is going to be higher than a 0. And then my max student. So whichever student represents my max grade. And I'll just keep that as an empty string. So these are the two variables that I want to basically have at the end that contain the values that I would want, the student with the highest grade. So now I can go through every single student in my dictionary. I'll actually call this that. So I'll be naming my parameter, and then I'm going through that parameter and I get another student. And then I can say if this value, so remember I can access the value at that certain student using a dictionary like this. And if that is greater than my current max grade, so obviously the first time it runs, max grade is 0. Then I want to assign max grade to this value because this is able to access that student's grade on the test. And then I can update my student as well to whatever student had the highest grade at that time while it's running. And then at the end, after running my entire for loop, I'm going to print max student had the highest grade with a max grade. And then I'll run it on the student dict. So this is taking the exact dictionary that we created using this function, and then I'm putting it in to this highest grade function. So now if I were to run this, so we printed this out from last time, but it says Jill had the highest grade with a 98. And if we look, yeah, Jill was the one with the highest grade. So actually I'll print this out just to show. Yeah, so we have our dictionary here, and then it gives us the correct information. So I see a lot of questions about this, so I'll quickly explain it again. Yeah, so here we were able to create our dictionary using this zip and going through both of these lists at the same time and then adding it to our dictionary using this statement. And then once we got here, so similarly to how we created when we did a max shoe size, if you guys remember a couple of weeks ago, then I created a max grade here and a max student. So this is just empty and is equivalent to 0 from the beginning, because that would basically be like the baseline. No one can have a grade of basically less than 0. And then the student is just empty. So now what I'm doing is I'm looping through that entire dictionary and student. So remember, if I were to just loop through the dictionary, I get a key. So in this case, a key is the name of each student: Bob, Jill, Joe, and Sue. So student is my key. And then I want to access what their specific grade is. So first time I run through for student and student dict. First time I get Bob, okay? Student dict, student. So that would be on Bob in this case. So Bob has a grade of 85. So is that 85 greater than 0? Then yes, it is. So yeah, Jill has the highest grade, but I'm basically just showing the process of everything. So I'll just say, so the first time is Bob, he has a grade of 85. So then since 85 is greater than max grade, so now max grade is equal to 85. And then max student is equal to Bob. Next time I run it, Jill, next time see it in our thing, Jill is a 98. So we have Jill and her grade is a 98. So now we check, is 98 greater than 85? Because our current value of max grade is 85. So now is 98 greater than 85? Yes, it is. So now max grade is equal to 98. And then I change my max student to Jill. Next time we run it, we have Joe with a 75. I say Joe's a 75, and then we say, then we check, is our max grade is 98 currently, is Joe's grade greater than our current max grade? So no. So our max grade stays at 98, and our max student is still Joe. And then same thing for the last one. Sue has a 91, so that wasn't greater than this. So line 46. Oh yeah, sorry, you were right about that. So this should be list 1 and list 2 because I'm taking the parameters from here. So I just directly loop through here. But yeah, correct. It should be list 1 and list 2.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So in the if statement, when you're saying if student underscore dict student is greater than max grade, and it's saying max underscore grade is equal to student underscore dict student, then where does it get to know what student is when it's saying max underscore student is equal to student? How does it identify what student should go? Like, where does it get student from?
So the student is, remember, each key in my dictionary. So student, each time it goes through will represent the first time it represents Bob, second time Jill, third time Joe, fourth time Sue. So then when I do this line, this basically just says, I want to take whatever my current value of max grade is and assign it to whatever student I'm at. So in this case, a max grade is assigned to 85 in the beginning. And then I also want to assign it to whatever student I'm currently at. So since it's 85 and my student corresponding to that grade is Bob.
I see.
Yeah. Okay, so if you guys have more questions on this, I'll review this again after class, or towards the end of class. But yeah, this topic is just dictionaries with keys and values. They're pretty useful whenever you're programming something. So yeah, so now we're gonna create a game that allows you to guess a number created by the computer. So the computer will randomly generate a number, and then you as the user will have to guess what that number is. So one thing that we haven't really covered in Python specifically is random. So random is basically allows us to get random integers, random decimals, or anything that you want. So whenever you want to use the random library, you want to do something called import random. So this allows me to use whatever is in random, which is sort of like a library created by Python to create random numbers. And then if I want to get a random number, I'll say my number is random num is equal to random dot rand int. So rand int is the function in Python that you want to use to get any random number from a certain range. So if I were to just do 1 to 10, that'll give me a random number between the values of 1 and 10. And I'll just do, they gave me 10, 5, 8, 10, 3. So you see it's random basically every time. I'm getting a lot of 10s, but yeah. If I just keep running, I get a random number every time. See all these different outputs. So yeah, so this is something I want to use. So in our game, let's just say we want the computer to randomly generate a number from 1 to 50. And then what we want to do is basically give the user a certain amount of guesses that they can use to guess whatever this number is. So the max number of chances that they have, let's say it's 10. So they have 10 guesses to guess whatever number it is. And let's also keep track of how many guesses the current user has. So I'll start it at 0 because obviously they start off with 0 guesses. And then we'll basically increment the time every time the user guesses a number. So in this case, we want our program to continue to executing until our user guesses has reached the max number of chances that it has. So we'll do a while loop to say that while these user guesses are less than my max number of chances, so while that I still have guesses left, then I'll start my program now. So now I'll say this is the guess that the user has, and I want to tell them to input something, say enter your guess. And remember that we're working with numbers here. So I want to cast this to an integer to make sure that the user is only putting in numbers. So actually, I'll include something up here. Just print welcome to number guesser. So that'll just be the intro to our program. And then we say now, okay, so enter your guess. So now whatever the user inputs, so we'll say if they guessed it correctly, so random num is our target number. If they guessed it correctly, then print you have guessed the number. So then, so that's good if they're able to get guess it on, like, so let's say the first try. Then another thing that we can do now is to do elif this guess is less than the random number. So now if this guess is less than whatever number is randomly generated, then I want to tell, say, the number you have guessed is too small, which means because the guess is less than whatever number it is. And then I can either do an elif guess is greater than random num, but since there's no other cases in this case, I'll just do an else statement, which basically means whenever this guess is greater. So then I'll say print the number, copy and paste it. Copy and paste is always going to be your friend. A lot less typing to do. Oh, too big, not too bigger, yeah. So basically, if the guess is correct, then you have guessed the number. If it's too small, then we tell them it's too small. And if it's too big, then we say it's too big. And then every time that they guess, we obviously want to increment our user guesses. So remember that with while loops, you always want to have that increment so that your while loop is able to end. If I never increment it, then this while loop will never end and the game will go on forever. So now this allows us to get this. So now I want to give a simple prompt to the user saying, will they, when they lose the game, basically. So that would be, so when would they lose the game? They would lose the game when the number of guesses is either greater than or equal to the max number of chances. So if their guesses is equal to the max number of chances, then I'll just say print, you have lost. The number was random num. So this allows us to basically print out, tell the user eventually what the number was. And then, yeah. So this actually should be good to run. So now if I were to run this, it says, welcome to number guesser, enter your guess. So I'll do 15. This is too small, so I'll do 25. 45, too big. 35, too big. 30. Okay, yeah, so now you see there's a problem here. So I said you have guessed the number, but it's still telling you to enter your guess. So like this is why it's pretty nice to like run your program as you're coding so that you can kind of see the different bugs that you have. So I can still input all these numbers, and then obviously finally it ended. But one thing that you can do is use this key command break. So when you find your number, I want to break out of this while loop so that I'm not prompting the user to continue to enter numbers after they've already guessed the number. So now run it again, 30, 20, 10. Oh, I forgot to save it, sorry. There, and then now you see you have guessed the number and then it ends my program. So this break is actually pretty helpful to like break out of while loops. And then since I break without achieving the total number of max chances, then it won't print out this. So I'll do a case now when we lose the game. So I'll just keep entering. Oh, wow, the number was 1. And then it says number of guesses is too small. You have lost, the number was 36. So yeah, you can see that our loss is working too. So this is just like a pretty simple game. That's doesn't take too long to create, but It's cool. Yeah, you can give it to your parents to try, you can give it to your siblings if you guys have one. Yeah, it was one. I've never really seen that before, where the answer was just one. Are there any questions on this? How the if statements work, how the while loop works, why I have this if statement, anything? Random? So after I run the code, it tells me on Sublime to enter my guess, but after I do that, it doesn't run the code. Yeah, it's hard for me to debug like that. But if I'll post this code on GitHub afterwards. But if you guys have the code looking like this, it should work. Was
I
there a
have a
question?
question.
Yeah.
Yes. Could you put in a number that isn't part of the parameters, like -100?
For a random number?
Yes.
I'm not actually sure. We can try that right now. If we do, I'll just comment this out for now.
I mean, like when you're running the code as one of your guesses.
Oh, you mean like so if I were to enter a negative number and
Yeah.
see what would happen.
Well, your parameters are still -100.
Yeah, but so yeah, it says it still would say you can still enter negative numbers and it'll take that. Let's see if it gets it. 0, still too small. Yeah, okay. So yeah, negative numbers work too. You can enter negative numbers and then put them as your, so it can just be whatever range you guys want. Yeah, so I see you guys are having a lot of suggestions on how you can change up this game. So you can also have error checking. So if the user were to feel like, so if I were to just do like that, then it throws me an error. So you guys can find ways to like stop those errors from happening, have if statement checks. So yeah, feel free to play around with this game, change it however you want. This is a pretty simple version of it. But we'll move on to our next game. So we're gonna try to create Hangman. So I'll give you guys a quick demonstration on how it works. Yeah. So this is what our game would look like. So we say, welcome to Hangman. Then it gives us all these dashes to represent the letters that I haven't guessed. So now I'll guess A. So I have 10 turns left. So I found A. Now I'll guess E. So then I got another one, I, incorrect guess. So then it like puts my numbers down. You see how I'm entering letters and then it's updating what my word is. So obviously I know what this word is because I created it. So I can just guess all these different letters. And then it says elephant, you have guessed the word. So that was like the word that we wanted to guess. So then obviously if I were to enter a letter, the same letter again, it says you already guessed this letter. You can do play around with this. And if I were to just keep going,
Can you randomize the words?
Yeah, so I have it hard coded right now, but if you have like a total list of words, then you can randomize whatever word you want to get from that list. So obviously, if you were to enter the word yourself, that would kind of defeat the purpose of the game because you're entering the word and you're just guessing the same word afterwards. So you can basically play around with that, and then the same thing, like change whatever word you want, and then give it to your parents afterwards to try, or sibling, or whatever works best for you. So I'll start out again. Welcome to Hangman. And we'll say whatever our word is. So someone give me what this word should be. Someone type in the chat a word that we can use. Yeah, Python, actually, that's a pretty good word. And then how many guesses? So we'll give total number of guesses. Guesses is equal to 10. So we'll give the user again 10 guesses. I'm not exactly sure what the exact number is in Hangman when you're like drawing out everything, but we'll just do 10 for now. And then we'll say while these total number of guesses is greater than 0. So that basically means that my user is continuing to guess and is not running out of guesses. So I basically want to continue to execute this hangman program until they run out of guesses, which is the same way how hangman in real life works, right? After you draw out the whole thing, your whole person is filled out or whatever, then the game's done. So the first thing that I want to do is basically get remember how we were printing out something like this to represent the word? So I want to be able to print that out initially. So what I'll do is I'll go for a character in my word. So this basically goes through each character in my word. And then I'll say, let's see. I need to basically be able to figure out what my user is guessing. So I'll basically create another variable to represent the guesses that my user has. So this is just a string, and each time that the user guesses the letter, I'll add to that string so that I have a total record of everything that the user has been guessing, and yeah. So then I'll say if this character, so for example, in the first time this would run on Python, it would be P. So if P is in my guesses, then I just want to print out that character. So in that case, it would be P. And then I can say else I want to just print out that dash that I represented to represent letters that haven't been guessed. And then since that's a letter that hasn't been guessed yet, I want to keep track of the total numbers that have been guessed also. So these are numbers that haven't been guessed. And I'll say that's equal to 0. And then every time that it prints out this dash, that means that we have a letter that hasn't been guessed. So then we'll say not guessed plus equals 1. So I'll quickly show what this looks like. Let's see, how can we do this? Actually, I'll move on real quick. So then now we see that if our not guessed, so this is basically the total. So not guessed basically represents the total number of dashes in our string. So as long as we have dashes in our string, that means our game's not done, that the user hasn't guessed the letter. So if our total number of not guessed is 0, then we know that the user has won the game. So we can say you have guessed the word. And then I want to break out of my while loop. So that will basically say that the game's terminated and then that they have won. What is a string with the dash? So yeah, the string with the dash basically represents every letter in my string that has not been guessed yet. So like, remember when we were running it, I don't have the window open anymore, but yeah, each dash is basically a letter that hasn't been guessed. And then what I'll do now is basically ask for the user to guess. So I'll say input, guess a letter. So now the user is going to input a letter, and then I'll say let's add it to our guesses actually. So we'll say user guesses plus equals user guesses. So this basically, each time that the user will input a letter through this line, we'll add it to our guesses so that we can keep track, as I was saying earlier, of all the guesses that our user has. And then now we'll say if this guess, whatever the user put in, if the user guess is not in the word. So remember how we used in earlier in our earlier in class today with the substring? This was basically to say, is this string inside another string? And then in this case, I'm saying if whatever letter they guessed is not inside my word. So basically that if they guessed A, then it's not inside Python. So I want to go into this if statement. Then it's not in, so I want to total guesses minus equals 1. So that basically decrements the total number of guesses, because if they misguess a word, then obviously we add like a head or whatever in Hangman, but in this case, we're just decrementing the total number of guesses. And then I'll just print out incorrect guess. And let's tell the user how many total number of turns they have left. So you have that many guesses left. So quickly, since I'm going kind of fast, I'm just trying to get through this program so they're able to finish today and I can get to the review at the end. So we have our word. Yeah, so I see you guys in the chat. I'm going to add some of those. I'm just making the simple program right now, and then I'll add a little bit more of those details. But yeah, so we have our word. We have our total number of guesses, which is 10. And then I created a string to represent all the different guesses that we have. And then we go through and we print out if a word has already been guessed, and or if a letter has already been guessed, then we'll print that out. Otherwise, we'll print out all the mystery letters in our word. And then our not guessed is basically representing how many letters have not been guessed. And then if that is equal to 0, which means all the letters have been guessed, then obviously the user has guessed the word. And then we're taking the input from the user and adding that to our guesses. So this guesses is just all the letters that the user has guessed. And then if the user, if the guess is not inside that word, my target word, which is Python, if the guess is not in there, then I decrement their total number of guesses so they have less guesses, and then print out to tell them a little bit more information. And then one thing, yeah, so what you guys were saying in the chat was I have to say, don't I need to check if the user guesses already? So yeah, that's a really good point. So I'll have to check if this user guess is already in guesses. Then I just want to print, you have already guessed this letter, continue. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head if we've gone through continue in depth, but break, what break basically does, break and continue are related keywords in Python. So break, what we've already gone through this, it basically just completely stops my loop. I exit out of the loop and I'm going on to whatever code is after the loop. But with continue, this basically is telling Python that ignore everything after this, and I just want to re-execute my loop and basically just go back to the top of my loop. So continue, restart loop. Not really restart, go back to top. I'll just say it like that. And then break terminates loop. So continue and break are really helpful when you're working with loops, either for loops or while loops. So continue will basically just allow us to go back to the top. And then, so one thing that I also want to do is make sure that that my user is only inputting letters and not really if they were to input multiple letters. So obviously in Hangman, yeah, you can try guessing the word towards the end of the game, but in our version of Hangman, we're not going to do that. So I'll say the length of my user guess. So I'm basically just getting the total length of whatever they're inputting. And I say if that length is greater than 1, because we only want a single letter, and I'll print incorrect letter was given, and then I'll continue again. So yeah, do these if statements need to be in a particular order? So yeah, that's actually a really good question, because in this case, yeah, I'll go over it one more time. But in this case, if I have this if statement, so you see I'm checking if my user guess is in guesses. So if I, by mistake, were to put this if statement after here, after I'm already adding each guess to my total number of guesses, or like keeping track of all the users' guesses, then this will execute every single time because I'm adding it and then checking, which really doesn't make sense. So I always want to make sure that I'm checking whether it's already in my guesses before I add it. And then this is our incorrect check. And then again, at the end, I want to say if my total guesses actually is equal to 0, basically means that the user ran out of the number of turns that they have. I want to print you lost the game. The word was, what is it, word? Yeah. So this is our last check at the end. So if the user runs out of guesses, then we tell them that they lost the game. So someone's asking the difference between this if statement and this if statement. So this is basically just checking when the user has a guess that is greater than 1 character. So a letter is obviously just 1 character. So I want to make sure that the user is not guessing more than 1 character. But this is the actual check to see whether the letter that they guessed is inside the word. And then this is saying that if that letter is not in my target word, Python, so if they guess A and it's not in Python, then I want to lower their number of guesses and print out that it's an incorrect guess. Yeah, so this actually is looking
Excuse
good.
me, just a quick question.
Yeah.
What is the necessity of having that increment in total? Sorry, not the total guesses, but the not guessed plus or
Oh,
equals
and this
one.
one. So remember how I'm always been
Oh
mentioning
no no
how
no, the one above that, the one like the
oh
not
here
guessed plus or equal one. No, it's in
this
the
are you
if
talking
else
about this
statement.
one?
No,
The
it's in the if
guesses.
else statement. The not
The,
guessed plus or equal one.
are you talking about this statement?
No, not this statement. The one that is under that print dash. It's
Oh,
like
here.
all the way at the top. Yes, that's the one.
Yeah. So this specifically is so not guessed. Remember is representing all the different letters that have not been guessed by the user yet. So whenever I'm printing a dash, that means that's a letter that the user has not guessed. So then I'm
Oh, I
incrementing
see.
the total number of not guessed numbers. So that's basically just a variable to keep track of whether I have zero not guessed words, if that makes sense.
I see.
Yeah. Okay, so now we'll run the code. Yeah, so now you guys see we have a problem here with each of these dashes is getting printed on separate lines. So we don't really want that. We want it to look like a nice word on the same line. So one thing that we haven't actually gone through yet is print with a dash. And then instead of going to a new line right away, I can just go, I can add another thing to my print statement, end. So by default, your end is going to be like a backslash n, which basically means go to a new line after this print statement is done executing. But I can kind of change what this is doing. So I can say that the end is rather equal to just an empty string, which means no space. So if I were to include this in my print statements, then when I were to run this again, then, see, like, so at least it all printed on the same line now, but this guess the letter is still on the same line. So I want to figure out how can I add a new line after I print all of this. So after this for loop is done executing, I'll just do an empty print statement like that so that it allows everything afterwards to go to the next line. Because you see, as we have our end with an empty string here, everything got attached to it. So if I were to run this again, then now everything's separately on a new line, which is exactly how we want it. So yeah, so now I can try, let's say I mistyped and I did 2 letters like that. And it says incorrect letter was given and it gave me thing again. So notice how that continue statement basically brought me back to the beginning of that while loop and then reprinted all the letters. So then now I can just guess like O. And then if I were to get something wrong, incorrect guess, I have 9 left. You can play around with this. Obviously we know the answer. But yeah, so you guys can see that. I just guessed a bunch of letters and then it kept telling me how many guesses I have left. So obviously if you get something right, it's not going to lower the number of guesses you have. And then at the end, it showed my word and says that I've guessed the word.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So let's say you want to say something for if they put in a number. So like instead of just having it pop up like error or something, is there anything like you can like write there? How would you do that?
Yeah, so that's something, yeah, I'm not going to do it right now. I'm not going to write down all the code right now, but you can basically just check. You can kind of, here, what's a easy way to explain this right now? But basically, when you have an input like this is going to always be a string, right? And then you can use a certain function. I don't know off the top of my head, but you can basically check whether it is of type string or whether it is of type int. And then obviously if it's of type int, then, oh yeah, you can do this. Like if type of user guess is, all right, I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, it's just like type of user guess is of type int. You can just Google that up and then you can check like that. Yeah, oh yeah, I didn't demonstrate that. If you pick the same letter multiple times and you see it says, you have already guessed this letter, and then it just printed it out again. It does the same thing with the continue, it goes back to the top of the loop. So I see some people are saying that we need to add something to tell them that they got it right. But we have this right here. You have guessed the word. So you notice how at the end it said you have guessed the word. So it's like, if you want to add more, feel free to, but I think that's fine. But yeah, so for guessing the letter, if you guess the same letter multiple times, we have that check here. Because remember we said if the guess is already in the guesses, then we say you have already guessed this letter. So it looks like we only have a couple minutes left. So yeah, again, I'm gonna review everything that we did today. And if I'll definitely go past 6. If you need to go by 6, we're not gonna stop you from going, but the video will be online, and if you can stay, that'll be great because it's a good review. So I'll quickly answer some more questions about Hangman. If you input a correct letter, can you make it so that the number of guesses thing doesn't appear? So yeah, so I have the print statement right here, which is outside this if statement. And then I can just indent this inside this if statement so that it only prints when the user has an incorrect guess. So now if we were to run it again, I can do P, let's say it's like J, then it'll only print when I have incorrect guesses. Yeah. So that works. So how do I add to tell if you got the letter right? So yeah, again, that's already here in this if statement, which basically not guessed, remember, represents all the letters that haven't been guessed. So then if it's equal to 0, then obviously we've guessed the word. So we print that out here. So it can be in this if statement. Okay, sorry, yeah, we have about 1 minute, but I'll just go through this review. So this substring, we just learned about the in command. We use that a lot in Hangman, so you guys should be a little bit more comfortable with that now. But that's basically to tell whether a string is in another string, or that's like a pretty good case for that. So I won't go through that. Yeah, so now we have a dictionary. This is what we introduced today. Each
Excuse me,
dictionary.
just a quick question on this.
Yeah.
So when I ran this code, I did the dictionary year equals 2020, but it still kept it in 1995. Is there a reason why?
So yeah, just verify that year is spelled correctly, and then also if you named a dictionary, make sure that these two are the same that you're accessing. If that isn't the problem, I'm not exactly sure why it would not be working. But if you just follow the code exactly like this and make sure all your names are spelled correctly and everything, it should be working. But yeah, so we have a dictionary and it has different keys and values. So remember, it can be string to string or string to integer. And then if I were to print out, I can print out dictionary just like this.
Oh no.
Yeah, so print it out a dictionary like that, and then I can use either the square brackets to get the value at that model, or I use the dot get to get whatever value is at that key. So I can also do the same thing for brand, and then it shows Ford, so year 1995. Yeah, so you can just use that. And then yeah, we just went over, this is how you can manipulate different values in the dictionary. And then here we have 3 different for loops that basically allow us to loop through the dictionary. So if we use just a key in dictionary without anything attached to this dictionary, so remember this dictionary is represented by my variable here, then I print out, I can either just print out the key, which will in this case print me brand, model, then year, or I can print out dictionary key like that, and it'll print out Ford Mustang in 1995. Dictionary.values allows me to get each specific value in my dictionary. And then in this case will be Ford Mustang 1995. And then dictionary.items allows me to get both at the same time. And then we did a create dictionary here. So I had 2 lists that were right here. And then we did create a dictionary that takes in 2 lists, this method. And I created a dictionary that I wanted to eventually return at the end of my method. And then I did a for loop, and I used this new thing that we learned called zip, which basically allows me to go through these 2 lists at the same time, and allows me to get the student, Bob, and grade 85 at the same time, so they're basically corresponding to each other. And then I used the same way that we manipulated a value up here. I used the same thing over here, so it's just to grab that student name and then assigned it to whatever grade it was in the list, and then I returned that. And then when you return, you can use this sort of syntax to say student dict is equal to whatever this function returns. So in this case, it'll return a dictionary with all the student and their scores or grades. So then I printed that out there. And then I'll comment these out now. So if we have the highest grade here, then you remember I created a max grade and a max student. Then I did a for loop through all of the students. So one thing that you guys can also do, so using what we learned up here, I can just say for studentdict.items, and then I can say for student and grade, same thing, and then I'll say if the grade. So remember, before we were accessing it through the key, but now I can directly access that value. If that value is greater than the max grade, then I'll say my max grade is equal to grade and max student is equal to student. And then I print that out, and then I can run that, and then I get the same output that we did before. So yeah, if you guys are having some issues with Hangman right now, I'll get to it in the next couple minutes. But yeah, so number guesser. So remember we learned random now. So random.randint allows us to get a random number from a range. So in Python, if we have a range from like 1 to 10, it will include every number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If you guys are in the Java class, you know, sometimes we have like a range like this and it'll only go 1 through 9. So in Python, no need to worry about that. It'll just give you the specific range that you specify here. And then we created a max number of chances that the user can guess. I'll actually lower that to 5. And I'll make this 0 and 10. Just make it a little simpler. And then user guesses is if that is less than max chances. So we use this while loop to basically represent that while the total number of guesses the user has, we want to make sure that's less than the total number of chances that they have, so they aren't going over the total number of chances we're giving them. And then we ask them for their input. And remember, I casted this to an integer so that we can specifically make sure that the user is inputting an integer. And then we said, if they guess the number, then we say you have guessed the number, and we break outside of our while loop saying that the game is done and that the user has guessed their number. And if it's greater than or less than, we'll provide them with guidance, provide the user with guidance to say whether it's small or big. And then remember, you always want to increment your guesses so that your while loop doesn't go on forever. And at the end, we check whether the user guesses was greater than or equal to the chances, which means that the user has lost. So yeah, that was pretty simple. Just quickly run that to show you guys. Or too small. Oh, yeah. Huh. Did I not save or something? Oh, too small. I was thinking differently. Yeah. There. Yeah. So that's yeah. Okay. Yeah. So going on to Hangman now. So I'll quickly address that question I see. So it says that the break is outside the for loop. So first thing you want to make sure is that this for loop ends right here, and that everything afterwards is going to be indented on the same line as this for loop. So now notice how the for is in line with my if. So remember, indentation in Java is very important. And then if I have that if aligned with my for loop, and then I guess that if this is not guessed, then I break. And you want to make sure that your break is indented inside that if. If you have a break like this, that could cause your program to have a lot of problems. So I always want to make sure that your indentation is correct. That's why I like to just organize my code with spaces and everything, so it's pretty clear on where everything should be. But yeah, so we just print it out, and then this is our word, Python, and then a total number of guesses, which is what we're giving the user 10. And then this is what we're doing to keep track of the different guesses that the user has. So our while loop in this case is making sure that the total number of guesses that the user has is not 0. It means that they still have a number of guesses left. And then this not guessed represents the number of letters that have not been guessed in the word. And then remember, we use this for loop to print out this sort of thing so that when we guess, we can see what we're guessing. And then we introduce this end so that, because remember, if we didn't include this end, then each print statement will go on a new line. So we want to keep them on the same line using this end delimiter. And then I use this print statement here just to get it to a new line. And then remember, yeah, I reviewed this. If not guess is equal to 0, then we have guessed the word. And then we ask for the user input. And then this is just checking whether that is a letter, not a word or a phrase or anything. And then we say that an incorrect letter was given. And Then we say, if this is already in the guesses, then we tell the user they have already guessed this word. And we use the continue in both of these if statements so that it just goes back to the top of our while loop and ignores everything below that. And then we added everything to the guesses so that we're keeping track of all the user guesses. And then we checked if it wasn't in the word, then we want to decrement the number of guesses. Say it's an incorrect guess, and then we're only printing out, telling the user how many guesses they have left once they get a word wrong. And then similarly to how I did this check over here, if the user, for the number guesser game, if the user guesses is greater than or equal to max chances, I did the same thing here where I said if the total guesses is equal to 0, I can obviously do less than, but it won't go below 0 because we're terminating the loop. This can either be equal, or less than. But yeah, then we say they lost the game. So we run that, and yeah, you can obviously play around with this. We've done this a couple times. Guess the word. So another thing is in Hangman, usually if you were to, okay, actually I'm going way over time, but if you guys need to leave, I'll just quickly show one more thing, part of this game. But if you have a word like Python is fun, then you represent it in Hangman like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. So that's kind of how it look in Hangman. But if I were to have a word like that, and I were to run this in our current Hangman program, then you see I just get a bunch of lines like that. It doesn't really look like the output I want. So I can just add a simple, and in my for loop where I'm printing out this entire thing, I can just add an elif that basically says, if this char is equal to a space. So I want to represent spaces, then I can just do print a space, and then I'll include my end, same way we did there. So now if I have the word Python is fun, then it just looks like that. Yeah, so it looks a bit nicer. Yeah, so class is done. You guys can leave whenever you need. But yeah, if you guys have more questions about the games we made today or homework or anything in general, then yeah, I'll stay after to answer your questions. But you can feel free to leave. Thanks for coming. So for those of you who are still here, yeah, I got a question about if you're in the Java class as well. Java, we reviewed classes yesterday. So Python does have the same thing. We may get to it. I'm not exactly sure yet. But classes in Java are like, classes are used more in Java, I would say, because it's more object-oriented, like structured like that. Python is also object-oriented like that, but it's mainly just for like scripting and stuff like that. I'll post the code probably within the next 15 minutes or so, depending on when class ends. Are there any other questions? Cool. Yep, thank you guys for coming, and I'll see you guys next week.